dig into the question of why. We talk a lot about God and what it means and what He wants from us, what He demands from us, and what our responsibilities are, and a little bit how we relate to Him, even though we didn't quite finish that topic as much as I would have liked to. But now we're going to try to we want to try to address the question of why God did what He did. And obviously, if God exists, the first assumption is that if God exists, then He obviously did something for a cause. Right? Intelligence doesn't do something with no reason. Even simple intelligence like our intelligence, we do things for a reason. Right? Every action can be traced back to a cause, right? A cause and a reason and a purpose. So clearly, if God is around, then He's clearly more intelligent than we are. How do we know that He's more intelligent than we are? Because He's able to create cells, and we're not able to create cells. And He's able to create livers, and we're not able to do that. And you know what He's also able to do? He's able to create people who are able to procreate and make more people. And there's two differences between what God could create and what we can create. When I say differences, I don't mean in quantitative differences. Because obviously, God could create us a moon, and we kind of can't do that. It's a little bit too big. But we can create a little moon. But the differences between what God can create and we can create is that God creates yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. Anything that we do, let's say we've made this, some human made this chair, which looks like it's a creation. But what that human did was taking existing material, you take metal, and you take this fabric and the foam inside it, and you're able to form it. House, you buy materials, you make the house. We are able to create, but we can only create with what we're given to create with. You're not able to just like that and make a chair if you don't have materials. But God doesn't work like that. God's able to create something from nothing. Yesh is called yesh me'ayin, something from nothing. There's a fancy Latin term for it as well. So that's one thing that God could do that we can't. And another thing that God does that we can't is that anything that we create, right? The second we put our hands away from it, it cannot create on its own. It cannot be creative on its own. Like this chair can beget other chairs. Even computers could be whatever computer is told, it could know. Whatever it's not told, it can't know. It can't be creative. It's not possible. It can't have its own self-consciousness. It can't have feelings. Right? It cannot exist on its own. So the whole idea of the computers are taking over and artificial intelligence. Well, its intelligence is limited to what kind of intelligence we give it. As opposed to the Almighty. The Almighty creates a person, and the person is able to be creative on his own and create other people and beget other things. You have an apple tree, and then you have apples, and then you eat the apple, and you have a coupon, like I said, for another apple tree. You take the seed, you're able to put it on the tree. The creations are able to be it's more of a dynamic creation as opposed to what we can do. It's static. So clearly, God has. If He exists, remember, if He doesn't exist, there's no purpose as holding like we are nothing more than the atoms floating in a cup of water. We're nothing. It's just we're able to perceive pleasure and pain, and our job is we don't have a job, but each man for his own. Try to compete for your portion of pleasure, and there's no purpose. Once you're dead, you're done. Right? That's if God doesn't exist. Has to be like that, right? Because there's no. If we just were formed into existence by mere chance, a mere coincidence, some random occurrence happening, some crossing of the wires, and before you know it, there's a big bang, and somehow inanimate matter turns into life, and you have this amoeba that suddenly turns into elephants, if it happens, right? Assuming it happened like that. Then we are just very sophisticated animals, and we have, there's no destiny for us, we're not here for a purpose. And we're actually, in fact, no different than we're just atoms that were somehow coagulated together and are able to experience pain and pleasure. That's all we are. But if God exists, then there's a purpose. And clearly, like I said, if minor intelligence like us doesn't do something for no cause, clearly intelligence on the scale of God is able to do things that we can't even conceptualize. Clearly, He's more intelligent than we are. He clearly has a purpose. That was the assumption we began last week. with. And then we just try to say, okay, what's the purpose? What's the purpose? So we said that from a traditional Jewish perspective, there's actually two answers to that question. Answer number one is that, let's just retrace our steps here. Now, if God, sorry for not being organized in my thought. So if God created us for a purpose, that means that there was something that was lacking, which we said is going to present somewhat of a problem, because if you accept the definition of God, he's lacking nothing. If he's lacking nothing, well, then what would compel him to do something to change? Like, why would he change the status of existence to create a world and humans and galaxies and atoms and animals and everything? So that was kind of the somewhat of there was tension in the question. It's not just a question. There's also, hey, if you accept the Jewish definition of God, that you're by definition saying that he doesn't need anything. Right? He alone is independent of anything else. So what could he possibly have been lacking that would compel him to create the world, the universe, humans, and everything that's around that we could see and perceive, and angels, and everything. So that's why there was some sort of a weightiness to the question. So we said that, yeah, God was lacking two things. Right? The two answers of why he created the world, and these two answers demonstrate some lack, not an inherent lack of God himself, but something that God cannot do in his state of being just God and no universe. And number one, we said it was God's kingdom. Right? If you're a king of an island and there's no one there, like you have absolutely no constituents, you're not really a king. You're not. You may have ultimate power, but you can't really. There's a certain degree of kingship that you cannot have unless you have people who are there and who are your constituents. But even when you have constituents, we said you could have constituents that are subjugated to you. You could be a dictator. You could force your will onto people, and that's only a minor degree of monarchy. The highest degree of monarchy is where the people nominate the king out of their own will. So what God wanted is that his kingdom, his kingdom should not be should be enlarged, should be greatened, should be augmented, should be increased, and therefore he created a world. And in the world, there's humans, and the humans have the ability to decide whether or not they want to accept on themselves the dominion of God. And should humans choose to accept upon themselves from their own volition, right? With their own ability to decide, should they choose to accept God? Well, then you have an independent, so to speak, entity attesting to the fact of God's kingdom, and that's an expansion of God's kingdom. And we mentioned that this perspective places humans at the center of the purpose of creation, and more specifically, the fact that humans can make choices. And humans are the only thing that's kind of independent of God, because we could go either way. We have intellect mixed with instinct, and therefore that enables us to make choices and to favor either our body or our soul, or spiritual or physical. And that's why if you have all the angels saying, "Oh God, you're the king," well, they really don't have an option to say otherwise. So that once again, it might expand God's kingdom a little bit. Because now it's not just God, there's also angels, spiritual entities that attest to his existence and his dominion. But still, it's not quite the same as it would be if humans, capable of rejecting him, but also capable of accepting him, if we are to testify to this reality, that's the greatest thing. So that's why humans, and more specifically humans' ability to make choices, is the purpose of the world. According to this perspective, yes.
I had a couple questions. Your statement about God needs nothing.
Yeah.
And I could be mistaken, right?
Yeah.
But the Torah has a couple instances where it says, "I'm a jealous God." Is there what is God jealous of? Is there a conflict there between the statement "He needs nothing" and the fact that he says in a couple places, I believe he says, "I'm a jealous God"?
Jealous or maybe vindictive means he exacts. He could be very punishing.
Okay.
But this goes back to what we talked about last time. All the way at the beginning of the last series, we mentioned that any time that God is given emotions in the Torah, It's an anthropomorphism, which means that you give a finite quality to an infinite being. It's actually not there to be understood literally, but it's there to be understood only because those are the only ways we can understand it. So all the emotions given to God, what they really mean is that God doesn't have emotions. Right? He doesn't. Because if the second you have emotions, you have to be linked to time, right? Oh, I got angry, but yes, but I wasn't angry. Right? So emotions can only exist in a finite world where people are you're progressing or regressing, but you're changing. You're evolving or devolving. Either way, you were angry, and now you're not angry, or you're not angry. Oh, I got angry. Oh gosh, so something got me angry, right? God doesn't exist in time. So God exists today as much as He existed in 1960, right? It's something we can't wrap our heads around, but God cannot progress. God has no emotions. And when it says, and therefore, when it says that God has an emotion, any emotion, it just means that's the way He treated people in that particular time.
My second question is, does Judaism believe that the earth is the only place that God put life or put man? And if the answer to that is yes, can we understand why He would have set out all of these other planets and universes that aren't dependent upon life on Earth, right? I mean, if Pluto and Jupiter didn't exist, the Earth would still revolve around the sun. And all these other universes outside of the Milky Way are not necessary to the existence of our universe. Why do we, and we have no evidence that life exists on any of the other places, why would we discern that it would be necessary for God to set up all of these basically barren objects in space?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm very happy that someone asked this question, but the way you started off the question is, what does Judaism say? Okay. Now, I don't know what Judaism says, because I believe, to the best of my ability, there is actually not a single source anywhere that talks about life elsewhere. I'm pretty sure there might be something that I don't know of, but from what I have researched, there isn't any source anywhere that mentions any kind of life on any other celestial being. Right. So what I'm going to tell you is my own opinion. And my own opinion is that I'm going to say that first of all, we don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. I would say it's probably very unlikely. Very unlikely there's life on another planet, because think about how many things have to exist in our planet for us to have life. Well, and also it's based on an assumption that life on another planet would kind of function the way our life on our planet. Like it's always like, oh, they found like a thimble full of water on Mars. It's possible to have life on Mars. Well, who knows? Maybe life on Mars, there could be a different life in a total different form. That maybe it's the form of waves, we can't even see it, and it doesn't need water. So who knows? So I would, like I said, I don't know. I would suspect that it's only us. We do have some sources, the more esoteric sources in Judaism, that talk about these different worlds that God either created or destroyed, or maybe might exist simultaneously in other iterations. So it's possible. That being said, your second part of your question was much more interesting to me. And that is, because it's very hard to speculate on things you don't know about. And I don't think, well, what if they find life on another planet? I'll tell you a little, again, back to the radical opinion of last week. Remember, another radical opinion. What is this fixation that everyone has with life on other planets? We have so many issues domestically, so to speak, right, in our planets. Why is there such a desire to send people on Mars and send messages and search for extraterrestrial intelligence? It's so silly. We have such real problems here. Why are we worried? Why do we have a concern that maybe some far-flung galaxy, hundreds of millions of light years away, has maybe some dude with I don't know, eating cheese balls? Right? Who cares? Why is there such a fixation on life on other planets?
Mind your own business, right?
No, not mind your own business. Who cares? Why is this such a compelling subject? And why are people so interested about it? Like, why is it interesting at all? Why would we even talk? Like, It's intellectual, but it can't. How could it be intellectual when you don't really have any tools? It means you don't work with any set of data points. You have nothing. It's just pure speculation. It's pie in the sky, literally.
Why worry about, say, paleontology? What's use of the dinosaurs?
Well, yeah, because that's more. That's also, or even history, even archaeology, right? True, but that's somewhat related to at least something that's we could. It's measurable. It's data. It's something you can touch. It's something. Yeah, it's a good question.
Philosophy is not measurable.
Well,
Who needs philosophy?
Okay.
What's the use for that?
Well, you would agree, Vitaly, that there's a difference between poetry and search for extraterrestrial intelligence. I think we
for
would.
some said it would be
Poetry?
if you ask.
I guess so. I guess it has a certain measure of compellingness. It's intrigue.
It's a generation that grew up watching Star Trek thinking that'd be cool. Flying around on a spaceship.
I don't know. Like
it's
it's.
the intellectual curiosity about,
Is it intellectual curiosity? Is it really intellectual curiosity?
Well, just like we are pushing the boundaries of, say, religious comprehension, Judaism, Christianity, whatever, comprehension of God, because we are compelled by our humanity to do that.
Yeah, but
Same can be said about.
yeah, but the intellect and speculation, you have absolutely no evidence either way as to whether or not life on another planet exists we have no evidence either way, so it cannot be rooted in intelligence.
The Vatican thinks so. They got the greatest telescope in the world here in Arizona, and they're all set up, and they're indoctrinating the constituents right now with the fact that we got to welcome our alien brothers.
Alien brother. I have a radical theory in it. I'll throw it out here, and I don't know if it's so radical. It's a theory I have.
I like radicals.
You like radicals? Okay. Everyone likes radicals. It's just my kind of radical, So my theory is like this. I don't think I've even shared this with anyone. I don't know if it's not even fully developed. So let's try. Maybe see if everyone agrees. My theory is like this. People don't feel comfortable with the idea of God. Why? Because it's like, there's Big Brother, and I better do something right, and we'd have a much better, easier life, quote unquote, much more simple life without God. It simplifies things a lot. There's less responsibilities, there's less requirements, there's no yoke, so to speak. I don't feel like there's some thing that created me. I'm not able to understand it. It could be viewed as being constricting and something that people want to offload. Problem is, there's such evidence to the uniqueness of our planet. Like, it was just perfectly suited for life. Perfectly, and there's so many different aspects of our planet that are totally unique to us that, like, it seems so perfectly designed that humans and life should exist only here. We have some estimates between 1 million and 0.25 to up to 8.7 million different creatures. And all of them are just here. It seems kind of like this was all pre-planned, and especially if you have hundreds of sextillions of stars out there, and none of them are capable of supporting life, and only us. And there's this tiny little sliver of temperature that life could survive at. Right? And oxygen. And
precisely, if it's 2 more or 2 less degrees, it wouldn't sustain.
And we have just the perfect amount of liquid water. And we have the perfect amount, and we have arable land, and we have wind. Otherwise, without wind, we'd all be toast. And without the earthworm, we'd all be toast.
I think it's human nature that they want to explore. They go down to the depths of the ocean. Did you find life there? Yes, we found this strange thing there. You go up to, it's human nature to want to explore, your surroundings and the
I understand.
idea of exploring. Maybe that promotes people's interest if they throw out there could be life when some people are really just trying to explore.
But my argument, I don't know if it's true or not. This is just an opinion, radical opinion, like I said. Maybe people would feel justified by saying, if our planet's not all that unique, well, hey, look, there's life on other planets. We found a thimble full of water. But there's nothing special about us, right? It just randomly occurred here, randomly occurred elsewhere. And the fact that what they're trying, there might be an agenda, maybe even subliminal agenda that people don't even know, that they're trying to kind of make Earth less unique, and therefore, well, if it happened randomly elsewhere, maybe it happened randomly here as well. That's my theory. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you all say?
Well, by life you mean like humans? and
No, or
animals?
yeah, but I even mentioned that we don't even know what kind of.
Well, but they found meteorites from Mars with bacteria. So I mean, they know they came from Mars. They know there's bacteria in them. So I mean, so I'm just trying to determine how you're quantifying life, because if you're saying, well, bacteria is a form of life, well, then they've already found it on another planet. So
Some of the planets, Aruba, which is one of the moons, they're having volcanic activity. I think it's of what, Saturn or Uranus. So I mean, there's some activity going on out there. But
Yeah, but
The argument is that because of the vastness of space and all the different bodies out there, that that there is zero probability in a lot of scientific communities that there is not life out there because of
that's based on the assumption. What's the underlying assumption of that?
well, there's no God. Because if there's a
That's
God, then
got
you
to be the
can
assumption. That's got to be the assumption, because hey, if we're just mere coincidence, well then, if you just do the math of what it would take to have our coincidence happen, well then it should happen also if you have so many amounts of other opportunities, of other resting grounds, so to speak, for all these coincidences to coincide. Well then, doing the math, it should seem likely that we're not the only one.
But I think the concept of God being the only one, our God, is not inconsistent with having life on other
I agree.
God can commute to other galaxies and create.
That's what I said. I said that it doesn't prove anything for us either way. But if you don't believe in God, you're going to have a problem that how is it possible that so many things worked out just in one place? It's going to be kind of a problem, right? Mathematically, how is it possible that some unlikely occurrence, if it's like naturally occurring, well, should happen more than once?
Well, life beyond the solar system neither proves nor disproves existence of God.
Absolutely. But I think that the maybe the underlying theory would be is that if you do find life on other planets, it's easier to accept the fact that our thing, what we have going here, is not that unique. It's not that special. And I think, and this is back to the second part of your question, and your second part of the question is, okay, fine, why is that needed? Why do we need all these planets? And I think that question could be expanded. Well, why do we need all these animals? Why do we need so many different kinds of trees, or so many different kinds of worms? Or yesterday I saw a YouTube video, this tiny little frog, cute little frog that makes these little squeaky sounds, right? And every day there's like they say 25 species go extinct. Like, there's so many different kinds of animals. Why all that? Like, why there's so many different kinds of foods? It's just about making decisions, right? If it's just about us, well, maybe it should be just us, and maybe a few animals. I guess animals for, I don't know, why angels? Why do we need angels? So, I think that the best answer to that question is that everything else is the arena for our lives. Yes, the only purpose is for humans. The only purpose is for humans. But not just that humans should live, but humans should live and make choices. Therefore, humans are put into situations where they have to make choices. They're put into a very dynamic world with lots of other stuff going on. Tons of other stuff going on. And each item, everything, its purpose, like this chair's purpose is to provide scenarios for free choice. Everything that you see, every animal, right, could be either a way to connect to God as well. Look at this beautiful animal. It's an opportunity for me to choose God. Wow, it's so sophisticated. It's incredible. It's able to procreate. It's able to jump, or it's able to defend itself in a way that no other animal can. Like the electric eel. It has a unique defense mechanism that the Almighty just put it into, that it's able to ward off predators. Wonderful. It could be used as a gateway to us accepting God, right? Or it could be a way for someone to just ignore God. All the different kinds of food that we have, right? It could be here. It could be used in a positive sense. It could be used to make good choices. It could be used to make negative choices. So everything, I think even the stars as well, like, we're put in this wonderful, enormous universe. Either we could say, oh gosh, this universe is just, just all randomly developed out of just some black hole, and try to do the mathematics to figure out how that works. Or we say, wow, look at the vastness of the universe that the Almighty created for us. It's incredible. It's just incredible on how the system works and how the interplay with all the different constellations, and the sun is exactly 93 million miles away. It's exactly the percentage point that it has to be off in order for us to be fried is infinitesimally small. If it was just a couple of hundred miles, I read this. I don't know exactly how accurate it is, but very significant, very, very little has to change for us to be either fried or frozen, and it just works out perfectly. Wow, that's a way to recognize God. I always say that the Almighty creates the sun and the sun and the moon. Now, the sun is roughly 27,000 times the size of the moon. But in our view, it looks exactly the same size. Like if you were to take the sun and the moon and try to see exactly identical for us. So what the Almighty did, for whatever reason, I'm not trying to draw conclusions, He took the sun and the moon and put them at the distance that, from our perspective, they look exactly the same. Which is just an interesting curiosity. I don't know what the choice is exactly we were being presented here with, but clearly it cannot be random. Like if it's 27,000 times, think of like a grain of sand, and those big exercise balls. Like that's roughly the difference in size between the moon and the sun, and somehow God placed it so far, the sun so far away, and the moon so relatively close, that to our view, it's exactly the same size. Now, I don't know why He did that. It's certainly something which is intriguing, maybe as intriguing as life on another planet. It's an intriguing question. But all those things are there to provide us opportunities for free will. Think about it this way. Why do humans wear clothing? Think about that. It's a big curiosity. All the other animals don't wear clothing. All the other animals not a single one of them. Besides for the preppy little dogs in Hollywood. Why are humans wearing clothing? Is that I'm not trying to justify keep them on. But why are we wearing clothing? Why do humans feel a need to wear clothing? No other animal is shamed walking around without any clothing. Point is, the Almighty put within ourselves this embarrassment, this shame of walking around unclothed. We all need to wear clothing, and now we have opportunities to make choices on what kind of clothing we're going to wear. Even clothing, something as simple as that, is something which we is an opportunity to make choices. Humans are once again the only animals that have professions. Did you ever see a rabbit that's a doctor? Is there a doctor rabbit? Just a regular rabbit?
Apparently, don't watch Nick Jr.
Oh,
And have specific jobs.
Yeah.
Ants have specific jobs. Like some of them will take care of the babies. Some of them are. But
they don't go to school for it. And it's amazing.
Choice in that, right?
Huh?
And there's no choice.
There's no. Well, yeah, exactly.
That's their job.
That's just their job.
Yeah.
We're the only creature. We're vastly more intelligent than any other creature. We're capable of verbal communication, oral communication. We're the only ones that are able to do that, at least in a way that is understood by other people. I guess if we have the intelligence to know that someone else is trying to communicate with us verbally or orally. I know that birds are able to communicate and orally, but it's not something that they don't have the intelligence to try to modify their speech in a way that we understand it. Otherwise, they would be talking to us as well. But we're vastly more intelligent than all the other animals, yet we're the only ones that under natural settings die of hunger and die of starvation. for the past 100 years, how many millions of people die of starvation? It's outrageous. And we're so intelligent. We're so much more intelligent than the animals. None of them die of starvation. None of them.
Then why do humans are pretty much the only species which have this capacity for deriving joy from torturing or killing for no food, no killing for the sake of killing?
Well. We say about the snake, the serpent. Serpent is the animal that there's a Torah statement about that the serpent takes pleasure in just killing for the sake of killing. The snake doesn't always eat its prey, or eat its victim, the victim of its killing. But yeah, that's another example. We have these weird emotions that don't seem to be logical as well.
They're capable of terrific good and also terrible.
Point is that humans are different, and the world is very, very compelling and intriguing. I'm trying to think of the right word. It's full of stuff, but all those stuff are all directed towards us and providing us with opportunities for making choices. So how exactly it works out it's not so clear, but everything is there for us and for us to make choices one way or the other. Yeah? Okay, so where were we? We're trying to recap what we did last week, and it's like already 10:38. Okay, so we said that we're here for a purpose. The purpose is humans making free choices. We can choose God, we can reject God. And the second answer given as to why the Almighty created us is that we're here to, the Almighty needed to give. He needed to give. He needed to give pleasure specifically. And if it's just the Almighty, well, can't give pleasure to anyone else. So he created someone who could be a receptacle of God's goodness, giving God's pleasure. So why humans? Just give pleasure to animals or give pleasure to angels? Same thing. Humans are able to make choices, and therefore through our choices, we're able to earn the pleasure. And because we earn the pleasure, it's the highest degree of pleasure possible. And therefore what God really wanted to do is to give the best pleasure, and the best pleasure is only possible if someone chooses, or through someone's choices, through someone's ability to reject that goodness, and he decides to accept it, even though it might be difficult. That's the greatest level of pleasure, when someone earns it. And therefore because humans are able to earn it or reject it, we're able to make choices. Therefore, we're the ones who are the function of God's purpose, by us being able to accept His goodness and His ultimate pleasure. Once again, our free will, that ability to choose, is the reason why we're the center of the purpose of the existence. That's pretty much what we got up to last week. So God wants to give us goodness, but not just any goodness. He could just, like I said, we could just have download pleasure all the time. We could just sit around in the spa and just like have pleasure. God would just inject us with more and more pleasure, and it's awesome. But that's really not quite as pleasuresome as something you have to earn to get. And there's nothing that could be given to someone that can in any way measure up to something that someone earned on his own. If you have, like I said last week, if you have a kid, a spoiled little bratty kid who just gets everything, well, he doesn't value it. As opposed to the kid who has to work to earn it, well, then he values and cherishes that he earned. So God wants us to earn our pleasure. And that's number one. And number two, the pleasure that God wants us to earn is a very high degree of pleasure. That's what we got to last week. And what we're going to try to hopefully show, probably not this class, maybe the following class, is how these two items of God's kingdom and God wants to give us pleasure really mirror each other as well. It's really kind of the same thing. Okay, so let's dig into new material. We make the claim that we're here to have pleasure. Not just any kind of pleasure. The best kind of pleasure. The best kind of pleasure, obviously, that has an assumption within it, is that there's different degrees of pleasure. There's good pleasures, there's great pleasures, and there's just amazing pleasures, transcendental pleasures. And what we're here for is higher degrees of pleasure. Not only that, we say the Torah is the ultimate pleasure manual. And when I say this in class, I've said this in class a couple of times to young adults, I say, what? The Torah is a bunch of restrictions on pleasure. Right? The Torah seems like just a book of restrictions. And the word Torah means instructions. And the Torah has 365 things that you cannot do. So how is this possibly going to be a book of pleasure, a pleasure manual, right? God's prescription of having pleasure? Chicken soup for the pleasure soul, something like that. Oh. That's what it is when the book is full of restrictions. When you read the book on a very simplistic level, it seems like it's just restricting one thing after the other. I was just talking to one of my good friends who came across the verse in the Torah that says that you cannot shave with a razor. It's the verse in the Torah that says that there's certain parts of one's head that they're not allowed to shave, like over here, and certain parts of one's beard that they cannot shave with certain blades. You have to use certain kinds of blades with other kinds of blades. So the first question is, does God really care about my facial hair? Is it really that important? That's one question people always ask. But what do you mean? If we're to have pleasure, God wants to give us pleasure. God loves us. That's why He created us. He wanted to give, and He's giving us the best opportunity to give. Why is He restricting us? I've never in my life had a cheeseburger, but from what I've heard, it's kind of awesome. Right? Especially with bacon. So once again, we see pretty awesome pleasures that God's restricting via the Torah. And now this crazy rabbi comes in and says that the Torah is a pleasure manual. He's out of his mind. You're like, oh yeah, he obviously never had that kind of a cheeseburger with the bacon. Otherwise, he would know that it's silly what he's saying. And you go up and down the list of the forbidden pleasures, so to speak, in the Torah. And you kind of wonder, it's a head scratcher, how is this going to be a book about pleasure? So to answer this question, I want to first try to build a little model here about the different kinds of pleasure. And it turns out that not all pleasure is created equal, there's actually a hierarchy in pleasure. There's simple pleasures, and there's more sophisticated pleasures. You have a chocolate bar. It's wonderful. It's delicious. You have ice cream. It's terrific. Right? But then afterwards, it dissipates. The pleasure doesn't last for that long. Maybe 5 minutes until you want another one. Or maybe to the next day, but then for sure it's gone. Any physical pleasure has a time limit. And it feels great maybe while you're chewing it, but then once you finish, it disappears. So that's obviously a different pleasure than the pleasure of, let's say, of love. If you share your life with someone, that's a very sophisticated pleasure. Now, you can't really pinpoint to any one point in time that, it's kind of harder to isolate it, maybe even harder to define it. You can't really pinpoint to certain chemical reactions and releases of endorphins that someone gets when someone eats a chocolate bar as when someone has the experience of love. So it's a much greater time frame. It's much harder to define, and it's much, much harder to earn. Ask anyone who's actually tried to acclimate with someone else and live a life with, spend their life with someone else, and it's, especially if they're of the different opposite gender, and you have to make so many concessions, and you have to give up so much of your own identity to actually make it even work. And it's a very long acclimation period. It's very difficult. You have to reinvent yourself. It's very painful. Why? Because you come into conflict with your selfish identity that you were from day one. So how is love a pleasure? It's crazy. You have to give up of your life, of your time, of your space, of your identity, everything. It's compromise after compromise. That's pleasure. But we know that the pleasure of love is a very sophisticated pleasure. And you sometimes have to give up something to get it. You have to give up of yourself, of your time, of your space, of your life, of your money, of your identity. You have to forfeit something to gain something. Something which is harder to achieve. It's typically harder to achieve because it's kind of greater payout. So what we'll find is that in the pyramid of pleasures, you'll find that the greater the pleasure is, number one, the harder it is to achieve it. Number two, the more it lasts. And you might find that you'll have to give up something of a lower degree of pleasure to accomplish something of a higher degree of pleasure. That being said, any restriction the Torah has, the Torah said it's full of restrictions, tons of restrictions, and restrictions on pleasure. Every single restriction of pleasure is a restriction of the lowest level of pleasure only. Lowest level of pleasure only, which is the physical pleasure. And I think that maybe the lesson is that while Judaism does not view physical pleasure negatively, I might have mentioned this before, we have in the Jewish law, there's an idea called a Nazir. Nazir is someone who makes a vow to not drink wine or to not come in close contact with dead people for a minimum of 30 days. There's someone who wants to be secluded, he wants to be holy, he wants to be special, he wants to increase the holiness in his life, he makes this vow. I'm not going to drink wine. Wine brings about frivolity. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be involved with dead people. Dead people are impure. I want to be pure. I'm going to become a Nazir. So it's a whole portion of the Torah, what he has to do, the processes. At the end of his period of Nazirut, he comes to the temple and he brings an offering. What kind of offering? A sin offering. A sin offering that you bring after you did a sin. And the Talmud says, wait a minute, this guy just did something good. He wanted to become holier. Why does he bring up a sin offering? It says, Al shetzir atzmo min hayayin. He pained himself from abstaining from wine. There is a sin to abstain from pleasure. There's a sin to abstain from pleasure. So the Torah clearly, and there's other sources to this as well. Like, for example, there's a Talmud, a Jerusalem Talmud, that mentions that if someone does not partake in the pleasures of like the various foods and fruits that the Almighty prepared for him, then he's not doing what the Almighty wants. He said, I gave this to you because I love you. And I want you to enjoy it. And even physical pleasures, I want you to enjoy it. And don't become holier than thou and say, oh no, I want only higher degrees of pleasure. No, the Torah views even the most simple pleasures very positively. That being said, there's a tremendous danger of someone only settling for the quick, easy fixes of chocolate bar pleasure. And this is the tremendous danger the Torah wants us to avoid. I could either go to law school, or better yet, I could go to medical school, and I get paid for 8 years. Not only that, to actually have to borrow money and to owe $300,000 at the end of 8 years. So I'm working like a dog, slaving like a dog, taking all these tests, having absolutely zero social life. I'm not getting paid. I'm paying. I'm going to owe $300,000. That's crazy. Why would someone do that? I could just go walk into the Burger King or McDonald's and flip burgers. I get paid that day. I get paid that day. And this is once again a classic case of someone having to make a choice. Long-term pleasure, accomplishment, meaning, right? Or quick, instant pleasure. And obviously there is a value of having something right away. There is a value of having something right away. Very easy. You don't have to work that hard to accomplish it. But if someone is doing just that in lieu of other pleasures, then they're kind of missing the mark on what God really wants us to have in life. And that's real, deep, lasting, sophisticated pleasure as well. I mean, playing tennis is wonderful. 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 Playing tennis is great. But if you just play tennis all day and all night, well, maybe you should get a job or build a family or go to school or start an organization or a company or something. Like, Be productive in life. Well, what do you mean tennis is awesome? Well, tennis is awesome. But if that's the only thing you're doing, if you're only subsisting on the lowest levels of pleasure, what kind of life are you living? What are you really accomplishing in life?
Yeah. So, and I apologize for jumping in and out.
Yeah.
In different things, but I'm inspired that the individualism allows for different people get different pleasures from different things and in different times and stages of our lives.
Uh-huh.
So the danger of overindulgence, for instance, it comes up with, we're not supposed to deny pleasure, and who is strong, the ones who control our urges. So we don't just dive in and do everything we want, but we have a bit of control for that.
Mm-hmm.
When you were talking about the highest level and the lowest level, I think that individuals have the opportunity to decide what is higher or the right amount for them at the time. Mm-hmm. You were mentioning giving up certain pleasures, like giving up the pleasure of privacy in order to share your life with somebody. Because privacy can be a pleasure. It can also be a lack of pleasure for loneliness. And so making that balance for what is pleasure and what is sort of achieving that high level, in privacy, one can achieve a lot of self-fulfillment.
Well, but the danger with that is that you could have someone, and I'm sure everyone here knows someone who in some way, shape, or form fits this characterization, someone who just wants to play Call of Duty all day and all night, right? And that person may find that very fulfilling. Hey, I'm playing with other people around the world, and we're shooting up the zombies, or, right, Assassin's Creed, or all these awesome, very engaging, very entertaining, very pleasuresome games. Would you want that for your son?
So, which is where the control of the urges comes in. That you don't do the same thing all the time. That if your urge is to play, what was the game? What did you call
Whatever.
it? Right. So whatever video game.
The video game. So these games are very immersive and it's very compelling. But I think we could, if we leave it up to our children, let's say, to make some of these decisions, oftentimes, I'm sure we all know someone like this, someone who just wants the easy pleasures and the readily available pleasures, and as a result of that, will neglect what we know are more sophisticated pleasures. Right? So you would let your family, your job, your professional life, your being meaningful, being involved in the community, all these very hard to get pleasures, but also much more fulfilling pleasures, sometimes go by the wayside if someone is just involved in simple, easy to get pleasures.
Which is why we have other teachings like don't separate yourself from community, etc. So it's fine. I guess what I'm saying is finding that balance and what's right for an individual becomes part of the teaching, where you're balancing lots of different teachings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but I would. My argument is that the Torah's restrictions on physical pleasures, some physical pleasures, what it's really trying to do is to make sure that we don't get too steeped into the simple pleasures of life, and as a result of that, not to lose sight of and not place a value on the more sophisticated pleasures, which is what God really wants from us. But then again, like the rabbi mentioned, there's a certain balance, because we are told, hey, you better enjoy life, because God life's here for you to enjoy. So what I want to explain with this balance, I'll get to in a second with Vitaly, is that the physical pleasures, the simple pleasures, are in some senses, right, or for some purposes, very, very good and necessary, and for other purposes, kind of a little dangerous. Right? There's dangers of overindulgence. There's dangers of making it a priority in life. Like, I don't think there's anyone who could argue that if there's meaning in life, it's about eating turtle bars or just it's hedonism. Hedonism is when someone says, "All I want is the physical, simple pleasures. That's all I want," and that's I guess that is it's a philosophy, But what that philosophy is really positing, what it's really promoting, is that the simple pleasures of life is all that there is out there, and we know better. So there's the danger of the physical pleasures, but then again, it's necessary. So why is it necessary? So we understand why it's danger. It's dangerous because it could be an escape, it could be mindless, it could be something where someone just makes it a priority. But it's also very necessary. Why is it necessary? Why would the Torah tell us that if you don't drink wine, you're doing a sin? Why is it necessary? Why, if let's make the assumption that what we really want is the higher levels of pleasure. Like love, meaning, purpose, understanding God, much more sophisticated pleasure. And we'll get to each one of these themes and try to develop these ideas a little further. But we're dealing with physical pleasure right now. The ice creams, chocolate bars, of potato chips, falafel, right? Food, anything that you can experience with your five senses. Music, those things are good. Right? It has value. What's that value? So, I think that I have a tradition from my grandfather about this particular question. I'll share it with you guys. And that is that anytime someone wants to make a spiritual ascension, their body, their soul wants to soar. The body wants to pull them down. Remember, we said last week, man, the Hebrew word for Adam could either mean Adamah, which is earth, or Adameh, become similar to God. Because we're this dichotomy, we're this fusion of the spiritual and the physical. So the spiritual wants to soar, the physical wants to pull it down. So we're going to have this tremendous conflict between our body and our soul if we want to accomplish the spiritual goals. So the one way to avoid this is by making sure that the body, the physical, is also placated, is also tended to. So if you remember the book of Genesis, we see Isaac wants to give a blessing to his son Esau. And he tells him, I want you to go, Esau, and make me 2 rack of ribs, fresh. Go out and get me some matamim, some delicious delicacies, so I can give you a blessing. It's a little somewhat of a head scratcher. Okay, Isaac, our forefather, I want to have a massive, massive steak, but not 1, 2 of them. And it has to be fresh. Don't get me from the fridge. Don't go to Randall's. I don't want the Randall's, that Kroger version. I want it fresh. Really? You're about to give a blessing, and the way you prepare for that is by having a massive, massive steak, but 2 of them. So, and we know the story is that Jacob came and usurped it, but he also brought the delicacies, and they got the blessings. And Isaac was blind; he wasn't, and Jacob wore the hairy clothing, and somehow he was able to get the blessings out of Isaac. So our grandfather explains that this blessing that Isaac was given was a blessing that was given in a prophetic blessing. If you want to achieve prophecy, your soul has to soar. Has to. Problem is, you want to soar, your soul wants to soar. What happens to your body? Your body says, you ain't soaring. It pulls you down. It's a drag on the soul. So what you need to do is you got to make sure the body's on board as well. You got to throw the body a bone. So what you do is you take care of the body and say, you know what? We're going to do a spiritual accomplishment. We're going to make sure the body's on board. We're going to give it something. Yeah.
Cheesecake, but I can have a little bitty piece, and that satisfies me. It keeps you from overindulging.
Well, but think about it. What's happening? Your soul wants to have the high level of pleasure, which is fitness, right? Your body wants to just drown yourself in chocolate. So you say, I'm going to give a little slice of chocolate. Hopefully, that will placate the body, and we can do what the soul wants. And this interplay, this conflict that we always have between our soul and our body, what we got to do is we cannot try to just suppress the body entirely, because what happens if you try to suppress the body entirely? There's the backlash effect. It rebels, exactly, rebellion. There's a backlash. And you meet these people saying, hey, I'm going on a diet, and I'm going to have just vegetables and omelets for 3 weeks now. And you map it out, and you get one of those apps that says, I'll lose about 33 pounds doing that. Wonderful. 3 days later, they're like, and they just, they see, and they can't help themselves, and they go on a binge. And there's a bit. They don't just eat what they would have normally eaten. They eat much, much more. Why? Because they try to suppress the body too much. And it was described once as a spring. You can't push it too hard, you'll have the backlash. You got to push it just a little bit. Make sure it's not beaten to a pulp, because otherwise, if the cat in the corner is going to just lash out at you. Right. So
which is completely connected to Jewish learning.
Absolutely.
Because we have so many students who rebel against learning because they go through this intense experience of a bar mitzvah and say, now I'm done with it. And they miss out of the learning just when they're getting old enough to
appreciate
engage
it.
in sophisticated learning.
Then we raised the bar mitzvah age.
That's what Reform Judaism wanted to do years ago. For the child who gets this sense of accomplishment at bar mitzvah, what we've got excitingly here is a lot of our teenagers after bar mitzvah come and help out in the religious school. So they're reinforcing their learning.
What's interesting is that the Talmud says that there's actually 2 ages of bar mitzvah. There's 13 and 20.
At 83.
Well, yeah. I think that's more of a modern thing, 83. And that is that this is significant because, like the way it says it is that the higher court, so to speak, like God's court, doesn't judge people till they're 20. So there's a certain degree of maturation that people get at the age of 13, but then there's when someone fully matures at the age of 20. So what's interesting is that rebellion, like teenage years, is exactly from 13 to 20. That's when the teenagers, and they have all this crazy storm of hormones and feelings and anger and angst and puberty and adolescence, and it's just a disaster. But we actually point to the beginning of that as being one step of the maturation, and the end of that being the completion of the maturation. You're an adult. Welcome to life. Get a job.
It's amazing that the medical community knows that the frontal lobe is not fully developed till 20 as well, which fully syncs up with what the Torah says.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're always catching up just perfectly. I once made an observation that there used to be this big theory or proof for evolution in the vestigial organs, right? Organs that were vestiges of previous iterations of humans with leftovers. Like people thought that the appendix was a not necessary organ. Appendix and over time, science has actually found purposes for all these organs. But there's only one organ that science has not found out a reason for. And what's interesting is that this is the only organ that the Torah tells us why it exists. That is the earlobes. The earlobes is the only thing that science still has no answer for. We know that the appendix is like a breeding grounds for bacteria. That when someone's intestines get this lining to the intestine has this material bacteria that makes the digestion flow properly. And this appendix, because it's when someone would have back in the day, people had food wasn't clean, the water wasn't clean. They would they would get gutted out, so to speak, and they would need to replenish the bacteria inside of their intestines. So that's where the appendix was like a little container full of this bacteria. Whenever was needed, it would just line the. That's what it's there for. And the problem is that in today's day and age, in modern countries, we have such clean food and clean water, we don't actually need it. So when the organ is not needed, it gets inflamed. It's not being used, it gets inflamed, and hence appendicitis. Appendicitis does not exist in sub-Saharan Africa. It doesn't. So that's an example. But it's interesting. The only thing that the Torah tells us specifically what it's for is what science tells us. Science says, we have no answer. Because it doesn't have, it's not a physical function. And it's interesting, the Talmud says, it says that the reason why we have earlobes is to cover our ears when someone's speaking Lashon Hara, when someone's speaking evil talk, so to speak. We have the earlobe to cover it up. You shouldn't hear. You don't want to hear someone, if someone says, hey, did you hear what happened to that dude? Or did something negative about someone else? Say, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in hearing. No. Right? That's what my kids did. Not listening. Right? That's interesting. And that's the only thing that science, because you know what? It doesn't have a physical function. That's why the Torah says, you'll scour all the science books and you'll scour everything. You'll about to find a purpose for it. Because there isn't a physical purpose for it. This has a spiritual function only.
Well, doesn't it say somewhere in Torah also that you pierce your earlobe as a sign that you will stay?
Oh, last week's Parsha.
Yeah.
This past week's Parsha. Friday night, I was trying to make this connection. That it says that a Jewish slave, I don't want to get into the whole discussion, but a Jewish slave who decides to stay on past his 6 years, so he's there for a 6-year sentence, so to speak. Right. He decides, I want to stay for forever because it's so wonderful here, treat me so well, that he has to get his ear pierced. Why is his ear? Why ear? Why pierce? Why by the door? So one of the reasons why it says in the Midrash is that because the ear, so to speak, heard something and it rejected it. So if you hear something, we kind of make a notation of the ear, a mark on the ear, earmark. We'll earmark him. But I wanted to make this particular point that the ear is kind of a spiritual organ, so to speak. But I didn't actually connect the dots. But that's interesting that you mentioned this today. Where were we? As always, we got so far off track.
Where you're talking about the body being.
Yes.
One of the things
So what's the balance? Pleasures, simple pleasures. We're kind of told that we have to have them. You cannot say, I don't want to have wine. Wine's there for us to enjoy. On the other hand, we're told that there's a danger of indulgence. So there's the danger of indulgence, making it a focal point in our lives. But there's also a benefit to it because, A, it could be fuel. Right? It could be energy that could be translated into spiritual or higher pleasures. And B, it could be a way to stave off one of the great dangers of spiritual ascension, and that is backlash. There's a tremendous danger. Anytime you want to accomplish something that's hard to do, why is it hard? Because it means giving up of yourself. You want to have, like we said, love, just as an easy example. It's very hard. Well, your soul wants it. Your body doesn't want it. It doesn't. It's hard for the body. The body wants to be lazy. Remember, the body's compared to the earth, which is sedentary. It doesn't move. It's very inflexible, very stubborn. That's what your body is. Your body doesn't want to compromise. So your body is going to reject it. You got to make sure the body isn't bored. You have to make sure, you have to massage the body into compliance. So there is a tremendous need that we have for these levels of pleasure, but that cannot be the goal, and we have to learn how to control it. Because our de facto state is one of identifying with the body. And it's very easily understood. It's instant. You eat the chocolate bar, you got the pleasure. It's there. It's very easy. It's very inexpensive. It's very low learning curve. It's kind of, you don't need to give up something. You don't need to learn something. You don't need to educate yourself about it. It's just simple. It's like, with the exception of coffee and beer, like it's all just right. You don't really have to develop a taste for it.
The flesh is willing, but the spirit is weak. No. That's right. No, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
The spirit is willing, the flesh is weak.
Don't you think it also comes back to, are we a physical entity having a spiritual experience, or are we a spiritual being having a physical experience? Because clearly we have to be both. But if we are a spiritual being essentially having a physical experience, then it is, in my mind's eye, much more easy to rise above that which holds us to ground.
The question is, who's in the driver's seat?
We are.
Well,
Our spirit is.
So I have a few ways to analyze this. Number one, the body and the soul comparison was once compared to the horse and the rider. Right? You can't get to where you want to get to without the body. Right? It's the horse.
It's
Hence,
your
the
meat.
horse behaves. You got to give the horse some goodies. But you can't become the horse. The horse cannot dictate where you're going. The horse can't be the one who's in charge of, right? You have to direct the horse where it needs to go. So the rider is the soul is the vision, the soul is the direction. But the horse is going to implement, be the tool for implementation of the desire, the will of the rider. That's one way to look at it. But with regards to, I think there's another way to look at it, and I think that it could be demonstrated that we are more associated with our bodies than with our soul. Just as for an example, if you do something which is bad for your body, you'll feel it much more intensely than you'll feel you do something wrong for your body, bad for your soul. If someone decides to steal, right, the soul does not like that. It's very, very painful for the soul. It's like your soul sticking its finger through the fire. It's very painful. You don't feel it because your feelings are more closely linked to your body. Now,
But your body will also feel it.
your body will feel.
If you steal, your body would also register it.
Well, your body might not register it. You might be able to experience the emotions of the soul. Your soul will give off a vibration that will be experienced by your emotions.
And your body will hold it because you'll feel it in your gut.
The point is, you could still feel spiritual pain.
Sure.
But if someone gives you a little poke in your arm, you'll feel it much more. It'll be much more tangible, pronounced, right? Because we're more associated with our bodies. Yeah.
I'm sorry, you mean.
Yeah. No.
So I just was wondering, why do we need to choose which one is it for each specific person with a body or soul? Why not can we decide to think in terms of, say, if I am reading Nietzsche,
Yeah.
maybe my soul now is the driver's seat. But if I'm going to that French restaurant to have a gourmet dinner, it's my body. And in other words, but it's a balance. How often do I spend reading philosophy versus how often do I need to go to the 2-star Michelin restaurant to do something on the same order?
But who says it's not like that? I think it is like that. I think that there are times where we choose our soul, we make the right decisions, and there are times where our body's in the driver's seat and our soul is put in submission. So yeah, I think that's correct. I don't know. Did I say that it has to be one or the other?
So this discussion.
No,
what having when some people would be A.
No. We're a mix. We have the ability to choose who's going to have preferential treatment. Now, if we do nothing, what if we do nothing? So this is my point that I wanted to bring out with this. If someone does nothing to change the path that they're on, the body will always win. The body's in pole position. That's a nice way to put it. The body's in pole position, which is a term for NASCAR term. It means the body's in first place. So, because we're more associated with our body, as babies, we're almost all body. Like, try to talk to a 10-year-old about the pleasure of love. To them, it doesn't mean it's irrational. Or even say, okay, have the healthy food because the candy, if you just want to have a diet of candy, it's not good for you. Kids don't understand that. Because to them, they're much, much, much more associated with their body. Over time, with maturation, with our intelligence, we're able to understand the pleasures of the soul as well. But if we don't do anything to change the state that we are born into as being body first, soul, 10th, right? Body first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, and then comes the soul. Well, that's probably the way it's going to stay. So, I want to say that I'll say it the way my grandfather said it. The Mishnah in Chapters of the Fathers, it says like this: you should chase after even a small mitzvah. Chase after even a small mitzvah. And you should run away from an aveira, from a sin. So I have to chase after a mitzvah, and I have to run away from a sin. What does that? What does that seem to indicate?
That we're more predisposed to sin.
The sin is chasing us. We better run away from it. And the mitzvah is fleeing from us. We have to chase it to get it. And what does that mean? It means it's much, much easier to do a sin than it is to do a mitzvah. Why is that?
When you have to be proactive.
But why? Shouldn't it be balanced?
No.
Why shouldn't it be
Because
balanced?
you're back to the body being in the lead.
Yeah, but
Back to the
if
body
free
being holy.
choice is predicated on the premise that there has to be balanced. If it's not balanced, well, it's not free. So how come the mitzvah is so much harder to accomplish than the sin?
Because
I have to run away from it.
the Torah
Ooh, pleasure is greater from the mitzvah. And if the pleasure was, let's say if the pleasure is much greater from the mitzvah, hence you have to work harder to get it. And if it was as easy to do a mitzvah as it was to do a sin, everyone would just do mitzvahs. So the balance is that, so this is why your question, I tried to present it from different angles. On one hand, doing a mitzvah is a much more sophisticated pleasure than doing a sin. It's much more sophisticated. It's a much greater pleasure. On the other hand, it's much easier to do a sin or to just let your body be in control and be just body, just simple pleasures, like forgetting about the soul and the soul's pleasures.
Why do you think the Bible says that the way of a child's heart is towards evil?
Is that what are you quoting from Genesis chapter 9?
I can't remember where it is, but it's either Genesis or Exodus. It's right in there somewhere.
I think
it says the way of a child's heart is toward evil.
I think what I believe you're quoting is from Genesis. Ki yetzer leva adam ra min ura, which means that the inclination of the heart of man is evil from his childhood. That's probably what you're mentioning. And that is that, like I said, from childhood, we have what's called the yetzer. I don't want to get into the exact mechanics of how it works, how the guf and the neshama, the body and the soul, and what is the role of the positive and negative inclinations. We've all heard those terms. Yetzer, which means an inclination, desire. So there's a positive desire, negative desire. How they all work together is the mechanics of it. It's not complicated. It's just the soul and the body. Those are intrinsic. The influences are external. But there's the influence of the negative influence starts from day one. The positive influence starts from when someone matures. So how is that fair? So it gets back to what we said earlier, that it works in a dynamic way, that the pleasure of doing good is a much more sophisticated pleasure. On the other hand, it's much easier, and you're in the driver's seat. It's been the way you've been since you were a child. It's been that it's body first. So that's the way it's balanced. So it's much easier. There's an element of familiarity that we have with our body's desires. It's much harder to have our soul's desires taken care of. Hence, you have to chase after it to accomplish it, but it's a much greater accomplishment. So in the end, it balances out. So what I want to at least have for today is to understand, number one, that the Torah is a pleasure manual. Number two, but the Torah has restrictions. So we say, well, it has restrictions. Those restrictions are only on the lowest levels of pleasures. And the lowest levels of pleasures, the physical, sensual of relating to senses, pleasures that we have in life, those things, there has to be a balance. On one hand, we're told you better have them. On the other hand, we're told, hey, it's a danger. And there's a bunch of things the Torah tells us to avoid. Why does the Torah tell us to avoid that? Does God really care about this? Right? What God's really trying to do, He's trying to coach us. The Torah, remember, is coaching us how to have pleasure. And what's telling us is that if you just spend your life only focusing on the lowest levels of pleasures, by definition, you will overlook, neglect the greater levels of pleasures, and you will you'll settle for simple pleasures. So, on one hand, it's needed. Like I said, it's fuel. It's a way to avoid the pitfall of the backlash. If someone just tries to have a diet, you just want the salad, well, eventually it'll bounce back on you, and you'll just bury yourself in ice cream. Right? That's the danger. Make sure you take care of the horse. The horse is going to help you to accomplish what you need. Right? Isaac with the steak. King David is another example with the music. Really, music? You're playing the harp. Like, that's a way to connect to God. Well, maybe there's a certain spiritual element to music. Maybe there isn't. But it could be a way to make sure that the body's on board. The body wants to hear the music. It wants to sit down and relax. You give it that, you're able to ascend now with the soul. So there's the good of the soul, and then there's the good of the physical pleasures, and then there's the dangers. And hence we have the restrictions. And all the Torah's restrictions, remember, the Torah is guiding us how to have pleasure, to guide us to have pleasure. What kind of pleasure? Highest degrees of pleasure. What does it tell us? Make sure you don't spend your whole life only settling for simple pleasures. Now, I want to say a wonderful story, my favorite story of all time. Ready? Because this, when we talked about what topics we should have for conversation, we talked about Musar. And if you were to synthesize all of Musar into one sentence, you would say Musar is the Jewish philosophy of character refinement and ethical perfection via learning how to have control. Musar is going to teach us how to harness our body, harness our horse, the proverbial horse, and making sure that it's only used for the positive ways, it's only used for fuel or for making sure the body's on board, but not getting preoccupied with the body, learning to control it and only indulge in the body for what's necessary for what I really want to accomplish. So my favorite story about this is the story of Rabbi Israel Salanter. Rabbi Israel Salanter was the modern day founder of this movement called the Musar movement. What he did is he tried to collect all the Jewish lessons about character refinement and self-control, and to make a movement out of it, to make it like like this very intellectual society of Jews that have this this way of life, the Musar way of life. We're controlled, we're disciplined, we're balanced, right? Very much very refined. And his years were 1817 to 1883. And he was a smoker. And this comes way before 1967, where the Surgeon General finally gave this the warning that cigarettes could be potential to someone's health. Everyone smoked, and no one knew that it was dangerous, it was bad for your health. It's a wonderful thing. And the intellectuals, you see the pictures, everyone's got a cigarette in their mouth, everyone. So he smoked, and one night, he woke up in the middle of the night, it was 2, 3 in the morning, and he wanted a cigarette. Problem is, didn't have any left in his pack. He was out of cigarettes. And the only way for him to get cigarettes in the middle of the night, what would he have to do? He'd have to walk about a mile to get his cigarettes. So he had in front of him two options. Either he could go walk the mile and get a cigarette, walk back, go back to sleep, smoke a cigarette, walk back to sleep. Or he could just go back to sleep and worry about cigarettes tomorrow. But his problem was, hey, if I walk an entire mile just to get those cigarettes, what I'm really doing is I'm feeding my temptations, I'm feeding my body, I'm indulging in the body, and I'm making my desire for physical temptations even greater. Look what you're doing. You're walking a whole mile. Such dedication to your cigarettes. What you're doing is you're losing control over yourself because your body now or your instinct for this physical pleasure is going to be drained, or enlarged. On the other hand, if I go to sleep, what I'm really doing is I'm saying I'm lazy. I don't want to walk a mile. I'll just go to sleep. So either way, I'm making one of my characteristics harder to deal with, harder to harness. I'm losing control. What do I do?
Just stay awake. Don't go.
Either way, if I go, that I have temptation. I'm my temptation. If I stay, I'm just being lazy. You know what he did? He got up. He walked the entire way. He didn't buy the cigarettes. He walked back and went back to sleep. Because I'm not lazy. I'm going all the way there. I'm doing the whole walk. I'm not giving to my temptations. I'm not buying the cigarettes. I'm walking back going to sleep. Booyah! Favorite story. So this shows us, like, that's the Musar perspective. I know that I'm in danger if I just let my body run wild. This horse could be crazy. I could so easily lose perspective of what I'm trying to accomplish in life. And each one of my character maladies and each one of my bodily desires, each one of those are holding me back from what I really want to accomplish. I got to make sure I have control. I'm the driver. I got the reins. I'm control of this horse. It's not controlling me. I'm controlling it. How do I do that? I got to make sure that it does not just run wild and me encourage that. I have to harness it. I got to control my character, be on top of it. On the other hand, it doesn't mean to be celibate. It doesn't mean to be a monk living in some. We don't believe that. That's not the Jewish. It's not the Jewish. That's not the Jewish way of life. We don't believe in isolation. We don't believe in flagellation. We don't believe in causing pain to yourself or abstinence. That's not a Jewish ideal. The way our perspective for this pleasure is we do it for specific reasons. We were supposed to enjoy it, but not in a way that it's going to make it a goal unto its own. It's only there as a method of assisting us in accomplishing the other goal. It's the candy we give to the horse to make sure it does what the rider wants. If we're just doing what the horse wants, we got to harness it, right? We got to make sure we got to walk there and say, I'm not giving in to the horse. The horse is not in charge. I'm in charge. I'm walking. I'm not lazy. I'm not buying the cigarettes. I'm in charge. The rider. That doesn't mean that you have to ignore the horse. You got to make sure the horse is on board as well. But you have to be in control. So that's the perspective on the simple levels of pleasure. What we're going to try to do next week is to say, okay, fine. So we understand the context of physical pleasures and why the Torah gives us restrictions in it. The Torah is helping us by saying, don't do this, don't do that. Does God really care about shaving, or does God really care about milk meat? Is it really that important? Maybe yes, maybe no. Point is that even if God doesn't care about it, what God's saying, okay, these things, don't do it, not because it's bad for you directly. It's bad for you indirectly. It's bad for you because if you just do all these things, right, your horse will be unleashed and you'll have a much harder time to make sure that the rider is in control and your soul's in control and you're able to achieve those and that's a free will decision. We're going to have to make these choices. What am I going to value in life? What pleasure am I going to pursue? Am I just going to settle for simple pleasures, or am I going to strive for the higher pleasures? So that try to explain what the value is of simple pleasures and why it's restricted, or the danger of it, and how that plays into our free will. What we're going to try to do next week is the next 4 levels of pleasures, other levels of pleasures, and how the Torah guides us in each one of them. And hopefully at the end of next week we'll reach to the highest level of pleasure. We said the ultimate pleasure. God wants us to have the ultimate pleasure. What's this ultimate pleasure that God's really talking about? And how do we gain it? How do we access it? How do we tap into it? And how is it possible, back to what we said at the beginning today, that there is an overlap between what the greatest levels of pleasures that we could achieve, the ultimate pleasures, and how that could correspond to God's kingdom, God's dominion being enlarged and being represented in a greater fashion. Which will bring the whole discussion full circuit. And so that's what I have for today. Well, it's actually 11:30. How do you like that? What I want to make maybe 2.5 quick announcements is that I am here from 11:30 to 12:30, and I'm going to be learning with people. Whoever wants to join is welcome to join. If you're interested, yes, yes, no, no, as we say in Yiddish. I'm learning with Dan to 11:30 to 12:30, but we can do it as in a group setting as well. Like, if you're interested, yes, yes, no, no, as we say. That's number one. Number two is that I have a unique opportunity at the end of February, or the month of March is Torch at my organization. We have what's called Kosher Month. And it's a month where we raise awareness about kosher. What does kosher mean? We try to give. We do a lot of instructional classes about what is kosher and just basic know-how of kosher. There's the laws of kosher and the modern applications of kosher. Is it easy? Is it hard? What does it mean? Like, it's a term that a lot of people use for a lot of things, you know. What does it mean in actuality? So what I want to do, if there's interest, I would want to maybe make a certain presentation at the end of February about maybe a kosher 101 or kosher questions and answers, if there's interest. So you all let me know if there's interest.
You mean in one of settings like this?
Well, we could either do something like this, or we could do it for half of it. It's not so long. It's I found a way to make the everything you need to know about almost everything you need to know about kosher possible in like 25 minutes. So if there's interest, then we'll do that. And I know that Alex Pfeffer, who's the head of the Houston Kosher Association, who's the director, he says he told me to ask you guys if there's interest, and he would come up and as well and help with a presentation or whatever. You know, it's a nice thing where they have the entire community for a whole month having a certain awareness. There's a whole bunch of programs. There's the kosher chili cook-off that they have every year, and no cheese, and like. No, it's like there are like 40 contestants, and like there's a whole panel. They're all tasting it. It's all serious. But yeah, so if there's interest, then just then
use some soy cheese.
yeah. Okay.
That would be a sin.